Have you ever been underestimated or laughed at just because of where you come from? What if one moment, one voice could change everything? Today, meet Amara, a poor black girl whose unexpected talent left an entire school speechless and proved that true greatness can't be ignored. The first thing people noticed about Amara Benton wasn't her voice, it was her silence. She walked the pristine halls of Rose Hill Academy like a shadow. Head down, backpack frayed at the edges, shoes a little too worn for a place where other girls wore designer sneakers and carried glittering iPhones. Her uniform was always clean, but faded, sleeves tugged nervously over her hands. Most days she sat in the back of class, saying little, watching everything. Rose Hill was the kind of school where legacy mattered, where last names opened doors and lunch tables, where wealth was worn like armor. And poverty was something people only acknowledged if they were writing a college essay. Amara, she was the scholarship girl, the one they let in to tick a diversity box and feel good about themselves. Most students either ignored her or laughed quietly when she passed by, but she never reacted. Not when the girls whispered and glanced her way, not when someone coughed goodwill behind her back, not even when a teacher mispronounced her name for the fifth time in a row. She simply kept her head down and hummed to herself. Soft melodies no one ever heard, but she was listening, watching, learning. What no one at Rose Hill knew was that Amara's life outside these manicured grounds was nothing like theirs. She came from a cramped one-bedroom apartment she shared with her grandmother and two younger brothers. Her alarm rang at 4:45 a.m., so she could help get them ready for school before catching two buses to Rose Hill. She didn't complain. She didn't have time to. And music? That was hers. Late at night, once her brothers were asleep and the dishes were done, Amara would plug in her old pair of earbuds, close her eyes and sing. Not to perform, but to survive. Each note a prayer, each melody a memory stitched from Sunday mornings at church and rainy nights when there was no heat. At Rose Hill, they thought they knew her. To them, she was just a poor black girl in the wrong place. But the thing about shadows, sometimes when the light hits just right, they steal the whole room. It started as a whisper during lunch. A cruel kind of amusement passed between trays of organic salads and overpriced smoothies. Let's sign her up for the talent show. A blonde girl with a $900 haircut said it with a smirk, flicking her fork like a conductor, setting a sinister plan into motion. Her name was Savannah Carlyle, and when she spoke at Rose Hill, people listened, or laughed. Her clique didn't hesitate. "OMG, yes," one of them giggled. "Make it look like some kind of diversity thing," another whispered. "Say the school's encouraging hidden talent." By the end of the day, the sign-up sheet on the student bulletin board had a new name scrawled in neat handwriting. Amara Benton, vocal solo. When the announcements played over the loudspeakers the next morning, Amara froze. Her name echoed through the hallways like thunder. She hadn't signed up. Heads turned. A few students chuckled. Savannah high-fived her friend and shot Amara a sugary smile. "Can't wait to hear you sing," she said, her voice dripping with fake sincerity. Amara blinked slowly, heart pounding. She said nothing, but inside, a storm had begun to brew. They thought they'd broken her, thought they'd cornered her into a moment of public humiliation, that she'd panic, stammer, maybe even cry on stage. To them, it was all just entertainment. A poor girl fumbling in front of a wealthy crowd? That was their idea of a joke. But what they didn't realize was this. Amara had been performing her whole life, not on a stage, not for applause, but for survival. She had sung lullabies to calm her baby brother when he was sick and the pharmacy wouldn't take their insurance card. She had sung to herself when the power went out and the silence of the dark apartment felt too loud to bear. She had sung through grief, hunger, heartbreak, and hope. So when they handed her a microphone, expecting her to crumble, Amara didn't flinch, didn't beg, didn't try to explain. She simply circled the date on her calendar and kept singing in her room. Because while they were planning to laugh, she was preparing to rise. The night of the talent show arrived with all the flair of a school gala. The Rose Hill Auditorium was decked out like a Broadway set. velvet curtains, gold-trimmed programs, and glowing lights bouncing off crystal chandeliers. Parents in pearls and tailored suits took their seats beside students scrolling through their phones, barely glancing at the stage. This was their world, a polished, privileged playground. Backstage, performers flitted about, tuning guitars, adjusting glittery costumes, practicing dramatic flips and flourishes. But Amara, she stood alone in a quiet corner, wearing a simple black dress that hugged her frame like it had been borrowed. Because it had. Her shoes were scuffed. Her hair was pulled back into a clean low bun. No glitter, no makeup, just Amara. And she was humming, softly, centered. The host announced acts one by one, a violinist who trained at Juilliard's summer program, a group dance routine led by Savannah herself, a magician with monogram cards. Each performance got polite applause, the kind that said, "That was fine, now who's next?" Then came the moment. A voice rang out over the mic. "Next up, Amara Benton performing a vocal solo." Laughter fluttered through the crowd like a cough people tried to hide. A few clicks leaned in, phones discreetly lifted to record. Savannah didn't even try to pretend. She grinned wide and whispered to her friend, "Watch this." The spotlight clicked on. Amara stepped out. For a heartbeat, she seemed impossibly small under the bright light. A single girl on a stage meant for orchestras. A girl from the east side of town, standing before generations of wealth and legacy. She approached the mic, slowly, calmly. The auditorium grew still, not out of respect, but anticipation, the cruel kind. A boy in the second row whispered, "She's gonna choke." Another voice said, "This is gonna be brutal." And yet, Amara didn't tremble. She stood with one hand at her side, the other gently grazing the mic. She looked out, not at the crowd, but just above them, like she was aiming her voice towards something higher. She took a breath, and then, in the silence, in the stillness, she opened her mouth. The first note didn't sound like it came from a teenage girl. It sounded like it came from the earth itself, low, rich, and vibrating with something ancient. A hush fell over the room as if someone had physically pressed pause on time. Amara's voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was pure, clean and raw, with just a hint of gravel, like the echo of a vinyl record playing in an empty church. Every syllable she sang rolled out with heartbreaking clarity, coated in something real. Something nobody could manufacture in a music studio or buy with a tutor. A few students blinked in disbelief. Someone lowered their phone, their fingers frozen on the record button. Amara's eyes remained closed. Her hands didn't move. Her entire body stayed still, as if even she was afraid of disturbing the magic she was creating. The song, an old gospel ballad her grandmother used to hum while braiding her hair, filled the auditorium with an invisible force. One by one, the smirks fell. Whispers died in throats. Teachers who had never learned her name leaned forward in their chairs. In the back row, the principal mouthed, "My God!" Her voice climbed higher, but never screamed. It soared like it belonged to something wild and sacred. There was ache in it, memory, defiance, and somewhere deep inside it, freedom. Savannah Carlyle's mouth hung open. For once, she had nothing to say. Her friends were still as statues, caught in the one thing they never expected from Amara: greatness. Because this wasn't some polished pop rendition. This was soul. This was culture. This was power wrapped in pain, filtered through grace. It didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded lived. And though she stood completely alone on that stage, Amara's voice carried everyone: students, teachers, parents, through every hardship they had never even known she endured. By the time she hit the final note, soft, trembling, perfect, the auditorium didn't just hear it, they felt it. They had come to watch her fail. Instead, they watched her fly. For a full 10 seconds after her final note faded, there was nothing. No clapping, no laughter, not even a whisper, just stillness. It was the kind of silence that didn't just fill a room, it owned it, thick and reverent, like the air right after a lightning strike, as if the crowd collectively realized they had just witnessed something far greater than they expected or deserved. Amara stood in that silence like a monument. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't posing. She didn't look for approval. She had never sung for their applause. She had sung for the girl inside her, the one who had once cried herself to sleep because the world made her feel invisible. For the girl who kept quiet in classrooms, bit her tongue in hallways, and carried the weight of poverty like a second backpack on her shoulders. She had sung for that girl and set her free. In the front row, a mother clutched her chest. A teacher wiped a tear and whispered to no one in particular, "She's gifted." Even the stage manager forgot to dim the lights, because no one wanted the moment to end. Savannah Carlyle, who had engineered the whole prank, sat frozen. Her plan had backfired in the most devastating way. She had set the stage for Amara to be humiliated, and instead, she'd given her the perfect platform. Amara didn't just take the stage, she took the room. One brave student finally stood, then another. And then, like a wave rising from the back of the auditorium to the front, everyone was on their feet. A standing ovation, not the polite kind, the kind that comes from the soul, thunderous, shaking. Some students even screamed her name, "Amara! Amara!" Not to mock her, but because they'd never heard anything like her before. And yet, through all of it, Amara remained still, calm, composed. She gave a small nod, turned, and walked off stage. Not quickly, not with embarrassment, but with the quiet power of someone who knew what she had just done. She had made them listen, not just to her voice, but to her existence. The sound followed her, down the steps, past the velvet curtains, into the wings, applause that refused to die. Amara didn't turn back. She didn't need to. The crowd had already said everything with their feet, their hands, their stunned, tear-glossed eyes. She left them standing, not out of politeness, but out of reverence. Behind the curtain, the stage crew just stared. One girl mouthed, "That was insane." Another clutched her headset like it was keeping her upright. But Amara just breathed. No smile, no tears. Just a deep, quiet inhale. The kind that says, "I've been holding this in my whole life." She found a folding chair and sat, letting the storm of noise wash over her like rain. For once, she didn't feel small, or poor, or out of place. She felt powerful. Back in the auditorium, people were asking questions. Who is she? Why haven't we heard her before? Was that a professional recording? The irony was rich. For years, they hadn't looked at her twice. Now they couldn't stop staring. The principal leaned over to a music teacher and said, "We need to get her in front of scouts. She could be on The Voice for heaven's sake." The teacher replied, "That girl doesn't need a stage." "She is one." Savannah sat like a ghost, her cheeks pale beneath her bronzer. She hadn't clapped. Couldn't. Her entire plan had dissolved into dust in front of the whole school. Worse, it had turned Amara into something she could never be. Unforgettable. And for the first time in her life, Savannah Carlyle was the one being ignored. Amara didn't ask for any of this. She hadn't planned to prove anyone wrong. But now, sitting backstage while the applause still echoed, she realized something. They had handed her the mic as a joke. She turned it into a mic drop. What they meant to use to shame her had only revealed their own blindness. Because the truth was, Amara Benton had been brilliant all along. They just hadn't been listening. Until now. By Monday morning, Rose Hill Academy wasn't the same. Neither was Amara. She walked through the front doors like she always did, backpack over one shoulder, hoodie zipped up, earbuds in. But something had shifted. The air felt aware. Students glanced up when she passed. Teachers paused mid-conversation. The same kids who once didn't know her name were suddenly clearing a path in the hallway like royalty was coming through. Whispers followed her. "That's her. She's the one who sang. Dude, she was better than half the artists on my playlist." Her locker was clean, not because janitors had done it, but because someone had wiped off the graffiti from last semester. The free lunch girl jokes had disappeared. So had the mean post-it notes. In their place, sticky notes that read things like, "You have a gift. Please never stop singing. You made me cry in front of my mom." The video had gone viral. Someone in the crowd had recorded the whole thing, from the first note to the last. And by Sunday night, it had spread like wildfire. First through the school group chat, then TikTok, then Instagram Reels. By the time the local news caught wind, the video had already hit 1.7 million views. A well-known music blogger reposted it with the caption, "This isn't just talent, this is soul. Someone find this girl and sign her now." For the first time ever, Amara's name was trending, not because of a scandal, not because of a meme, but because of her voice. Her email was flooded. College music programs, independent producers, even a rep from a major label asking if she had representation. But more than any of that, students, strangers, even teachers started looking at her with something new in their eyes. Respect. Savannah Carlyle didn't speak to her. She avoided eye contact completely. That Friday, she dropped out of the spring showcase, citing personal reasons. But Amara, she sat at lunch surrounded by new faces, people who wanted to know her story. Her voice had opened doors, but it was her grace that kept them open. She hadn't just stunned the crowd, she'd awakened them. 2 weeks after the talent show, Amara was called to the front office. She thought it was a mistake. Maybe someone reported her for something dumb. Maybe her free lunch eligibility needed renewing again. The secretary gave her a quiet smile and handed her an envelope. It was thick, cream-colored, gold-foiled edges. "Open it," the secretary said, trying to hide her excitement. Inside was a letter, and not just any letter. "Dear Amara Benton, we were moved beyond words by your recent performance. The raw emotion and technical brilliance you displayed represent everything we stand for in the arts. We would be honored if you would perform as our featured soloist at this year's Tri-State Youth Music Gala." Her hands trembled. This wasn't just another school event. This was the biggest youth music showcase on the East Coast. Televised, sponsored, and watched by industry professionals around the world. They wanted her, a girl who had once been the target of a joke. Now, she was the headliner. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Voice lessons offered, stylists volunteering to dress her for the gala, teachers checking in on her progress, offering encouragement like she was suddenly a campus hero. Even students who had never spoken to her were sliding notes in her locker. "Show them what Rose Hill sounds like. We're rooting for you." Her mother wept when she saw the invitation, not just for the opportunity, but for the validation that her daughter's voice, the one she used to sing to the ceiling fan, to the cracked window pane, to the dishes in the sink, had finally found the room it deserved. The night of the gala, Amara stood backstage at Lincoln Center, dressed in a gown she'd never imagined wearing, under lights she'd never dreamed would shine on her. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't scared. She was ready. And as she stepped onto that grand stage, greeted by thunderous applause from a room filled with legends, critics, and cameras, she realized something that would stay with her for life. They may have laughed at her before, but now, the whole world was listening. Amara's story reminds us all, no matter where you start, your voice matters. When the world tries to silence you, sing louder. Because sometimes the greatest power lies not in fitting in, but in standing out and daring to be heard. What will your voice change today?